Marry me, Annie here. This video is a response to a question from a viewer. I have a few things that viewers have left me for potential topics, and I do plan on getting to all of them. This one is, how do you nurture a coven and keep things running smoothly? It seems like so many covens and groups have a hard time pulling together. During your years, what have been your key observations? It's an interesting question, and according to the group I've been part of, the answer has been different from group to group. There were some ways in which the very first coven experience I had was the easiest, even though I ended up in a position of leadership there with a lot of responsibility. One of the reasons it was the easiest is there was a clear set of expectations. The expectations were around attendance, without exception, attendance for the Espots and Sobbits, and also for a dark moon celebration. We were all there every time together. The circle was complete every time we gathered. Well, it doesn't mean that there were occasional reasons why we might be absent, but that was the exception to the rule. Expectation was we would be there. And the expectation was what we would do when we were there. It wasn't around, strangely, it might seem to those of you who don't have experience of traditional covens, it wasn't around a set of beliefs. It was what we did when we came together and what we expected as the outcome from that. Everything protected that. It might not have been a circle of consensus led by the group. It was led by those who were in a position of leadership because they had undertaken responsibility to make it a priority, if not the priority in their life, to hold the space and see that it met its own expectations. We didn't socialize outside those gatherings. It's not common nowadays for that to be. We came because there were so few of us at the time to come together from many different directions. Some of us drove a couple of hours to get to our gathering place. We didn't socialize in between. It wasn't part of who we were. It wasn't about our lives outside of our coven time. We came together to study, to explore, to honor our gods, and to work our magics. There wasn't anything outside of that. What we did not then encounter was the drama of personality and life situations and the wider experience of who we all were. We came together as who we were in that moment to our circle. I'm not saying that circles in those times didn't have their moments of drama, but they were far and few between, at least in my circle. We very carefully vetted who we brought into the circle, and those who came to us had done their homework in advance. They knew what they were looking for, they knew what they brought, they knew what they expected. We didn't say yes to everyone. It wasn't about growth. It wasn't about reaching out. It wasn't about socializing. So within that structure, in that protected environment, almost that cloistered environment, there weren't too many challenges. Occasionally someone wasn't a good fit and they left, or we asked them to leave. But it was rare because the vetting process, both the time we spent deciding if someone would be a good fit and the time they spent deciding if we were a good fit before coming into our inner circle, created that safe space within the circle. Now, I have to say that my experiences outside of that first experience in the 70s were different. They were actually better for me, whether I was leading the circle or attendant to the circle. I preferred, as time went by, a more fluid idea of what circle would be, a sense of family that included who we were outside of that time together in circle, how we socialized, the inclusion of non-pagan partners, for example, for our families, for our children, and the wider experience of who we were, no matter what we chose to be when we were in ritual space together. Some of those circles were by consensus, or we didn't have a particular leader or set of leaders. Some did have that sense of the space being held by a leader or a couple of leaders. My next experience outside of that cloistered environment of the 70s was in the 80s. Again, it was a circle that I led, at least over time came to lead. When circle became more, let's just say the edges of our circle were very defined when we gathered for ritual and to celebrate and to honor our gods. There was a definition of the circumference of the circle. But our circle was wider than that. We loved spending social time together. A couple of times a year, usually at the solstice and at midsummer, we had our moment of our own circle, just the 12 of us, but we also had a celebration intended to include families, partners, and children. That kind of circle has fed my soul most powerfully in the decades since the 70s. With it comes an interesting set of circumstances. And I think that's probably the experience that will help answer my viewer's question more about how do you nurture and hold the center of circle. The first thing is being aware that there is a center to circle, that there is what you are when you come together. That it has nothing to do with what happens outside of circle. That it's a matter of your devotion and your energy. What you call into circle, what comes to your circle because of who you are when you come together. A good circle knows it has that center. It knows when it does gather for celebrations in ritual. There's something that happens there that doesn't happen outside of that particular time and place. Or as we say, the time and place outside of time and place. Frustrations. The first thing is, I'll say it from my own experience going in search of a circle after my first circle, and seeing what worked and didn't work from those who present themselves to circles I led after that. There's a responsibility that works from both directions. There is a responsibility, if you are seeking, not to do so out of desperation. That's hard, isn't it? If we want to reach out to folks face to face, heart to heart, hand in hand, we can be so needy of that, understandably so, that we'll try and force any potential circle to work. It's not the case. You really have to do our work to know if something is what we need it to be. With no expectations it'll change once we're there, but is it what we need? A balance to that, if you are holding the center of a circle and considering those who might become part of your circle family. You can be very fond of someone. You can understand their need to be with you. But you can, for many different reasons, understand they're not a good fit. It is not a negative reflection on the seeker if the circle does not perceive them as a good fit. The same way it's not a reflection on a circle if the seeker discovers in the process it's not a good fit for them. You can't put that square peg into a round hole. I think it's the greatest mistake we make. If there was a coven on every corner, it'd be easy to find the one that's the perfect fit. But when that is not the situation, and we need that connection deeply, we can try and force ourselves into a bad fit. Or we can, because our hearts are so present to who we are already as a circle, want to be that to someone that's just not going to be a right fit. We don't have any guidelines for how either of those decisions is made. It's unique to the individual and it's unique to the coven. No matter how social, no matter how blurry the edges are of a circle, how much it includes in the wider sense. It's who we are in circle that matters the most to the circle. The circles that I've been part of that worked well, there was an expectation of those already in the circle and those who might be considering joining or being invited to join the circle of a certain degree of emotional and spiritual maturity. I've never been part of a circle that was full of personal drama, emotional hissy fits. Even in that first traditional circle where there was a hierarchy, there was never at any point a sense of anyone being better than or less than. Those things happen in some circles. When the blending of energies is not appropriate, when the blending of personalities and emotion is not appropriate. Even if we have similar goals in mind, the truth is there's a lot more to blend in circle than just what we do or why we do it. Good circles, we are truly naked within them, vulnerable and open, perhaps more powerfully personally present there than at any other place in our life, because that vulnerability is our openness to our gods as well as to each other. That's why the energy that doesn't blend well, even if that person is wonderful, even if that circle is wonderful, needs to be called out and dealt with. It's not an easy thing. And that brings me to a tricky part of my discussion of the success of a coven. If I had ever seen a coven that was, by consensus, successful, I would be promoting that as the best way to hold that space and be inclusive of the energies and the personalities and the emotions of everyone who's there. What I've seen is the successful circles have a balance of leadership. It might mean that someone different leads at different times, that responsibility rotates. It might mean that there is a person or a couple of people or a group that holds the center of the circle of a place of love for those who are part of it. The best circles I've seen have that kind of binder, whether it's the same leadership all the time or whether it rotates. And when it rotates, no matter what your role has been in other gatherings, you have an understanding of, well, this is who I am in this circle now. Let somebody else hold this space for you. I had a powerful learning of that in my 50s when someone I had spent time training began a circle, and I was without a circle at the time. And she became a powerful priestess in her own right. I became a powerful attendant to that circle. I knew who I was within that circle, no matter I had priestess and high priestess over the, would it have been 30 years leading up to that. There's who we are, and there's who we are in circle. I don't mean that we disconnect from who we are in the wider world, especially if our circle is a social circle also, a wider, more inclusive circle. But there's a sense of a responsibility to each gathering, to the gatherings as a whole. Someone, and that could be different, within each ritual, holds the space so that the others can give over to the experience of being taken away. There's no room for power play. There's no room for egos. Do they show up? Of course they do. The best of us who lead will tell you we deal with that often. We're in positions of leadership because of our experience and what we've learned, what's been passed on to us by those who took the time to be with us and teach us. There are greater lessons in humility available to those who choose to lead in some form than those who are attendant to circle looking to someone else to lead. Probably a powerful reason why we all need to have the opportunity to lead, to have the power of holding that perfect of a place on behalf of loved ones. There's no easy answers on how to nurture a coven. Whether you have a group that by consensus can deal with the things that come up, or whether that group has decided for itself who will hold that center on behalf of the others the best, who can release their ego and give of themselves in that way. There has to be a firm holding, a holding that's not afraid to make the tough decision. There is always, in a circle that works well, a balance of love, mercy, and it's balance which comes from a place of tough love, knowing what has to be done, knowing what has to be sacrificed. And that creates the environment within our circle of constant creativity and evolution. There has to be that balance. A circle that is led by consensus that can come to that balance is good. A circle which can place its trust in those who can hold that for the circle, whether in rotation or a consistent leadership. It works. You can't be afraid to make the hard decisions. You can't be afraid, if you're the seeker, to say, my seeking needs to take me elsewhere. You can't be afraid, if you are holding the center of a circle, to acknowledge what that circle needs from each of those who are in attendance and whether it's receiving it. It's not a reflection on circle or the individual when there's a parting of ways. Whenever two or more people to get together, though, all kinds of emotions, all kinds of senses of wanting to be part of something and maybe feeling left out at times within it, all those things arise. A good circle talks it out. A good circle spends as much time deciding what their circle will be as they are in the process of being in that circle. A good circle has to be willing to change over time. The demise of my first circle was because we were not willing to change over time. Time kind of moved on away and left us there. We were disconnected from what had originally been our most powerful reasons for gathering. It was actually a good thing. We all went off and fed our soul in other ways. The circles I've had since that time have led me to believe there's a lot to be said for more inclusive, more emotional, not just energetic circling. There has to be absolute trust. There has to be absolute trust in everyone who's part of the circle and everyone else that's in the circle. There has to be absolute trust when you are in a circle, when you look at the shining faces of those who surround you, that you could not trust them more. A circle can be two. A circle can be more than two. But there's a responsibility on the part of those who attend and those who hold the space to put circle first. Even in a free-flowing coven, there are expectations that have to be set and agreed by those who come together. And there has to be ways to deal with expectations not met by those attending, and perhaps even addressing when the circle is not living up to its potential for those who are within it. First and foremost, there must be love, respect, the willingness to be vulnerable, and the willingness to put circle first. That has to do with the individual as they approach who they are in circle. It also has to do with that greater circle that we create when we come together and what it's offering back. It has to meet all of those expectations. We go in search of what feeds our soul. If we find the right circle, it comes before emotional and energetic struggles we experience and the ups and downs of our lives. I think one of the most difficult things is when there's not a good fit. It's not a matter of judging. It's a matter of knowing what is held as sacred and defending it. It's simply not easy to hold any circle. The circles that have worked best for me have been those where there has been an authority of leadership. Sometimes that leadership has passed from hand to hand throughout the wheel of the year or year to year. Other times it's been a steady sovereignty of leadership that we look to. For instance, in my case, a priest or a priestess in combination, or we were the priest or the priestess in combination. The power is in our coming together, in our willingness to put aside and step into that sacred space together, and to hold others to the standard of the circle as the circle has defined itself over time. There is no set answer for my viewer's question. The seeker seeks with intent, only joins a circle that satisfies their soul. The circle opens to embrace new members only when the circle senses they are greater for the joining of that new member. It takes love, and it does take many different forms of sacrifice.